Welcome to the Art of Authority podcast, bringing you interviews and episodes to help you radically optimize your authority and influence to become the go-to expert in your field. Here's your host, authority positioning coach, Mike Saunders.
Hey guys, Mike Saunders here, the Authority Positioning Coach, coming back with you another segment with John Hall, who is the author of Top of Mind and co-founder of Influence & Co. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, so when I decided to do a summit called Authority and Influence Summit, well, who do you want to reach out to other than someone that is an influencer on the topic of influence? And I think that's really awesome. And when I had you on my podcast a few months back, it just really resonated with me what you do. And I love your agency. I love your approach. So give us a little bit of background on the book Top of Mind and the company Influence & Co, because they're really the thread that runs through them is developing that influence for your clients and then using that for them to become known.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the idea of Influence & Co and Top of Mind are kind of at the core, it's just trust. Is that I've been very big on the way that you earn influence is through engaging people in a way that builds trust. And so content is one of the key ways to do that and scale it. Obviously, there's other ways to earn trust, but that's something that we've kind of formed a niche in, and that's where Influence Co was born, is that we wanted to help people create engaging content from and about them out in the kind of digital landscape, so that when people are reading or educating themselves or engaging in content that is valuable to them, it's either coming from or has that company or people, key employees mentioned in it. And so it started off with just a simple idea of helping build trust for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Now we deal with some of the largest Fortune 100 brands out there. While we still work with the entrepreneurs because it's a much needed service, it's been a fun evolution.
You know, it's interesting when you say the word digital, because a lot of times people would think, back in the day, let's get on TV, let's do newspaper ads. And those have a shelf life because it's kind of like, how long does a Facebook ad campaign work for you? Well, as long as you keep feeding the machine.
Right.
So those digital assets, the mentions in or the links to, those things live on forever. And that's the thing that I want people to realize is, yes, you can get mentioned or interviewed on a local TV station, and that's great. It's not like you're going to run away from that. But the shelf life of that is as long as that, is going to be shown on their channel. So how did you come up with the focus of focusing on that digital to keep up with the trends and to then take that content and make sure that it's sticky and long-term, kind of like the breadcrumb trail online?
It's more like when you're let's say looking at your credibility and your influences, it's kind of all a map, and it's a plan of where's the customer journey, what's the perception of your brand. So I always tell people to take a step back and look and say, how are people engaging and reading around you? Are they looking online at publications? Are they looking on social like LinkedIn or Facebook? First you look at those places, and then you look and say, what's the perception of your brand? Because some people don't need like a $100,000 investment in their brand because they just need a minimum level of credibility where people can look and see, wow, this is somebody I want to do business with. So what I tell people is like, hey, map it out first and look at and say, like, from a perception standpoint, have I been talked about in mainstream media or blogs or things that bring credibility? What are other credibility points? Who are the clients that we've worked with that are big? There's all these things that people look at in when they're kind of investigating if they should be working with you, and those things can be helpful. Then there's that next stage, which is this, it's kind of this next level of influence where it's actually becoming influential. Just because you have some credible things about you doesn't mean you're influential or an influencer. It's actually the people at mass scale or important context for you, listening to you, engaging with you, and that's where the content marketing is key, is that you have to have a consistent stream of content coming from you in places where these people consume content, and then also on your own sites.
So you said a huge amount of information there, which is so critical that I want to point out a couple things. Consistency. You can't just check off a box and go, cool, mentioned in, fill in the blank. Cool, seen on, fill in the blank. It's got to be consistent. And I'm sure you have found this with clients where they think it is just the checkbox and I'm good to go, but then it starts dwindling off. So what do you say to the clients that feel like, I just need one or two things that I'm good to go? How do you convince them that it's got to be that consistency out there?
I mean, it's aligned with goals. I mean, to actually, everything goes back to what you're trying to accomplish, and you can't truly think you're going to move the needle if you just do a one-time thing. It's just not going to happen. And so you've got to have that consistency there. And you also have to hit several birds with one stone. This is one of the key things that people don't think about. They're like, okay, I want to get placed here. And earlier before we started this, I had told you that some of the things we're involved in, it's mainly thought leadership, PR, content marketing, but SEO also plays a factor in that. When we're getting, let's say, an article placed that does well, we might look and say, hey, we should refer to this content in the future because we want something like this to show up. It did really well. And publication, like SEO used to be like a bad word in publication land just because there was so much black hat stuff. Mm-hmm. But publications like it when your content is good, it's engaging, and you get it to show up because it brings consistent, engaged traffic towards them. So I would say it's about consistency, and it's also about consistently leveraging it, and not just for one purpose, but for multiple purposes. And that's ultimately how you're going to get mass ROI, is that it's consistent and you're leveraging it in every area to kind of squeeze that juice of value so that ultimately your ROI just keeps on compounding.
Do you advise clients or do this for clients where you create this piece of content and have it as a placement in this publication or on their blog post, and then they can convert it into a podcast episode, or they can then kind of memorize the script or the flow of the content and do a Facebook Live? What are you advising that way? Because I'm certain that you cannot say, we write a blog post and get it put into this publication and then you're good to go. You've got to do those different mediums to capture your target audience because they don't only run in that one lane.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're the best digital content and that thought leadership coming from you and about you. As you get into the podcast, that's something where we would refer them to a partner like you, who's because it's just such a large spectrum when it comes to influence, and to think that one company is going to go and solve all your problems, you're just you're in la la land. And so for us, it's saying, okay, this is what we can do great. And what I've tried to position it as is it's the core to me, because it's been the core to my strategy, is that I do podcasts, I do speaking, I do a ton of stuff to build influence, but the core of it, at the very center of it, is this content engine of creating content from me and getting that placed in different places, because that's the source that can a lot of times, for example, I just booked a keynote where I sent them an article and I said, hey, this is what I had in line with for that keynote. And they're like, great, I love point 3, point 4, this is awesome. And I saw that there was other related content that you had out there that did well too. So I didn't have to put together a speech. But I mean, I will end up having somebody on my staff taking that and making some visuals. But when you look at that, that was a very clear catalyst, is that speaking's great, but the core of that was the content strategy.
Well, and the interesting thing there is I spoke yesterday with someone about this, and they said, funny you should mention that, because I did that this morning, which was this. They got this question in from a prospective client, and they asked a series of 3 or 4 or 5 questions. And they said, I could hit reply back and type in a 9-paragraph answer, but what I did was I created a podcast episode. Now, we could say, I'm going to turn it into an infographic. I'm going to turn it into a long-form blog post. But the point is, they wanted to have that evergreen and reuse, so that when they replied back to that person and said, hey, I'm answering your question in this format, now other people that come along and see that are able to have their question answered in the exact same way, but then they don't have to retype that question. Well, to your point about the keynote, you've already done that content marketing and established that out there, and you're able to show that, number 1, to get the keynote because they see you doing it, but number 2, you can go, oh, you want point 3, 4, and 9? Okay, good. And then your staff goes and pulls out and goes deeper and creates some graphics, and then you speak from what you already know. That then becomes, it is that foundation. It's that leverage point, right? I mean, in other words, you don't have to think, what do I have to talk about today? Because you just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and creating case studies. And I think that's the exciting part with content marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you say to someone that says, okay, you say I should be or could be an influencer or a thought leader. I don't know that I am. It's almost like you got to convince them. You're like, no, look, you've done this in the industry, and look at your resume and look at your accomplishments. How do you extract that thought leadership out of someone that might not think that they've got, reams of knowledge in them?
I mean, people have to get past that. Like, they have to have some sort of or some sort of confidence and belief in themselves that they offer value to people, especially if they're in a leadership role or anything like that. It's funny. I was on a podcast with Tamara. I don't know if you know Tamara McClary. She even pointed out that sometimes a sense of ego or some ego is good. Now, granted, too much is not good, but you have to have confidence in yourself. You have to have mental strength. And I would tell those people to get past it. Like, you have to, a part of leadership these days and a part of bringing opportunities and inbound opportunities to you is by getting educational content. And so you've got to take a step back and say, what do I know? What do I know well? What are things I can learn and become the best at? You gotta challenge yourself, because if you don't do it, I promise you other people are going to. And especially in roles where employees are becoming more valuable because of their brands, there's going to be someone else that gains an opportunity because they have the confidence and they take the steps forward to get past that barrier, and they map it out. They say, hey, here are the steps I'm going to take in the next 12 months, and they take it a step at a time. They don't say, I'm going to become an influencer tomorrow. And really the best people in that area don't even say, I'm trying to become an influencer. It's hey, how am I trying to gain trust with this audience and engage them consistently?
Or become an educator and an advocate for my target audience's cause, or educate them and help them. And then it just, the de facto response is, oh, well, you're an expert, you're an influencer. So yeah, the person saying, I need to be that influencer, all of a sudden now you've put the cart before the horse.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to even say that I'm an influencer. It's great when people are like, "Oh yeah, Hall's an influencer." That's fine. For me, the title is not as important as the credibility and the trust that comes with it.
Do you ever find with clients that might not have their brand or their persona, out there yet, that once they start seeing, oh wow, now I was mentioned here, and their own internal confidence starts getting bolstered, and almost you can feel their voicing in the content you're creating for them, but you can see them kind of come to life, because it's like, okay, I knew I was good, but that's reaffirming. And that's my theory, is that the more people see that, the more they want it, and the more it kind of bolsters their own confidence in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, or people need to just believe that they're like, this is something that's important to me as, and it's not just about like the external value; it's also about the internal value. One of our clients a while ago said, the biggest value that I got from doing this was it helped me think more strategic and thoughtful about how I'm communicating, not just to these people, but just people in general. Is that like, it got me to think about the direction of our company, the strategy that we're doing. And I'll tell you honestly, that's happened with me. Like I've said, this is a great example, is that I've written articles where I publish it, and there's a self-awareness moment where I publish it and people are like, this is great. Like, we got to start doing this. They're like, this is really good, valuable information. I'm like, cool. And then I look at it and I'm not even doing it myself.
Right.
And so it's like those things are extremely valuable in self-development, in confidence, in figuring out the direction you're going, in attracting talent around you. So, I think that the benefits are there for sure.
Do you work with clients in helping them develop the strategy or blueprint for their content? And what I'm thinking is this. I think I saw on your website recently an infographic of like the customer's buyer journey. So what if you were trying to pull clients to your firm and you work for XYZ company? Would you want to create a piece of content that first, interested them at this piece, and then it draws them into where they now are like, okay, now I understand what this is. Now, what about this question? And then and gets them all the way up to the end, kind of like, getting them feeding ducks some bread. It's like if you were to run after them, they sprint away. But if you kind of throw some bread out there, they trust you. Do you work with clients to go, here's the ultimate end goal? We want business to be transacted, but before they get to that level, they have to understand this piece. And then after that, they need to understand this piece.
Yeah, it just goes back to, this has been around for 5 or 6 years, even longer, is about touch points. And it's like, I think some people say it's like between 5 and 8 touch points on sales, which are the best. You don't even actually want to sell somebody on the first go at it. To be honest, it depends on the product, depends on the service. For me, to build a real brand, like it's different. Like if you have a short campaign that you want to do, that you have an internet marketing or some sort of campaign where you're just trying to get pay-per-click, like there's a better way to do it other than building up your brand. You can do a paid campaign that's more valuable. But for people who are wanting to truly build a brand, you need to say, okay, this is my long-term commitment. This is what I'm spending time on, because I want these people to come back. I don't just want to buy from me once. I want to have multiple products. I want to have a brand that can evolve, and these people are going to want to buy from me because people will buy from what they trust. And you don't earn trust if somebody just clicks. And so I gave the example of in one of my keynotes about how my wife educated me and influenced me to cook more. And so we have a once a month date where I ask her, how can I help you? And she asked me how she can help me. And one of the things was cooking, that she said, I'd love to see you cook more. And in that situation, she got me to, and she asked me to cook, and I didn't for a week or two. Then she sent me a piece of content, and it was from Plated, and I read it, and it was about 7 essential tools. Then 2 weeks later, I still hadn't done anything. I read an article that she had sent to me about what dumb spouses need to know in the kitchen.
Ooh,
and
did she cross off the word dumb first?
It wasn't like dumb. I forgot what it was. It was like what
attentive spouses do for their
who don't know what they're doing. I think it might have been. I don't know. I'd have to look it up again. I have the other one screenshotted, but I missed the other one. But I read it. I read it, but then right before our next date, she goes, hey, like, and it's this moment of vulnerability that I call where someone's like, and the example I get is when your boss comes in and is like, why is our competitor doing this? Or do you have this report done? It's a sinking feeling. And she goes to me and she's like, hey, like, so how's cooking going? And I immediately am like, oh, crap. And I run back to those articles. And at that time, they had helped educate. I got the tools. I ended up actually being a client of Plated, and I had it sent to my office. I went home and I cooked, and I did that for a little bit. And during our next date, she's like, hey, this has been awesome. And I was like, yeah, I got to come clean, honey. I've been buying Plated and doing this. She goes, I know. And I was like, geez, like
it's better than what you were doing. At least you are doing it.
But she educated me. The key thing is that she actually got me the right content. I ended up being not only she influenced me and got what she wanted in a cook, but Plated one because they got the client because they educated. And it was several touch points before there, and I've ended up advocating for them in several large keynotes, and there's a lot of value there.
Did she know what she was doing, by the way?
She actually made a joke and she said, isn't this what you do for a living? And I was like, yeah.
But there are some great lessons right in there because she was educating you and not trying to go buy, sell, coupon deadline. She was educating you. She sequenced it out. She didn't, barrage you. She was using some personal relationship, of course, the marriage relationship, but she was playing on that. She was reminding you, and then guess what else she did? When it was discovered that you used a service, not something from scratch, she didn't downplay that. She was like, great, because you weren't using anything before, so at least you were doing it. So I think that there's some wonderful lessons there that we can pull away about content marketing. So that's a cool example. I heard on a podcast recently that the phrase content marketing is almost it's not necessary anymore. And the point that they were making is content marketing used to be a thing where it was like, hey, content marketing. Now it should just be a foundation of your marketing strategy. Call it whatever you want, content or not, but you should just be doing this type of marketing. So what do you think about the fact that content marketing really is not a newfangled shiny object anymore? It just now is baked into a solid marketing strategy.
It's not even, to me, it's not even a marketing strategy. It's evolved past that. It is a marketing strategy in a way, but the reason why it's become more is because it's evolved how marketing is related to other parts of the company. So, for example, years ago, 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't use marketing content in employer branding. You couldn't use it in recruiting, training, investor communications as much because they're super promotional. If you're like talking about, we have the most amazing product, this, and you're like, oh, we want you to work work for us. It just didn't come off as natural. But now with content marketing, it was more focused on educational and getting good, valuable content about the industry, what's valuable to these stakeholders. And so it made that content more valuable across the company. So then when you look at that, it goes down to, well, to have a good content strategy, you have to have the why behind it. So then you take a step back even further. It's like, what is the messaging the company wants? Why do we exist? What's the purpose of this content? And then so you get core to the basic core messaging of the company, which is used in every aspect of the company. So it's like content marketing ends up being fed by this core messaging, and then it becomes this asset in every other part of the company now. And so for the companies that I see doing it really, really well, it's the content marketers that are going to their CEO and saying, hey, or their leadership, highest leadership they can get to, and saying, hey guys, this what we do affects every part of the company significantly. And so this is what I would like to do, to talk to them to see how we can help and basically be a fuel for them as well. And so it's unbelievable how I think content marketing, I think it's going to turn into content recruiting. I think it's going to turn into content investor communications. Marketing was just the first one because we were used to it.
Yeah.
The next one I think is recruiting and employer branding. As that takes shape, there's going to be a lot of opportunities there for marketers as well.
That's really, I love that thought there, because I call, authority positioning, content marketing, like blue ocean, because everybody and their brothers in whatever, Facebook ads and SEO and all that, that's the red ocean. Well, what you just described is something interesting, because I'm certain, and I don't live in the field of, recruiting, but I know that there's some headhunters that just want this one person. And it's like, boy, we need, kind of like the football, we want to get the Peyton Mannings of the world on our team. Well, how else are you going to do it other than maybe having that good content kind of marketing strategy for the purpose of recruiting? I've never heard it said before that content marketing just was latched onto marketing, but now it should be content latched onto other things like that, recruiting. I think that's a really spectacular field.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't like I'm like some brilliant.
Just own it.
No, I'm not. It's more. It's like it's not like a brilliant like idea that's unproven. It's actually come from just listening to people that we work with. Like you start on thought leadership content, and you're like, why are you doing this? And they're like, okay, well, for sales, for trust there. And then you're like, oh, who else is valuable to you besides sales? And they're like, well, recruiting, but this messaging is important here. And you're like, well, that's kind of similar. And so it's what I tell people to do in marketing is when you follow the value and ask the right questions, you're going to arrive at something that's successful. And that's what we're doing there. And we've identified where we're starting as Influence Co. starting to be hired on recruiting sides, on employer branding, on other elements. And we're even filling up other budgets where I always thought we'd be in the marketing budget. Now we're starting to be in like marketing, PR, recruiting, like these other ones. And so that I'm just giving you the sign that we're seeing. But you never know what can happen. But I think that is based on how we're following the value with some of these brands. That's the direction we're going.
Yeah, and I'm thinking from the employer side, of course, but even from the prospective employee side, if I want to go get hired by some firm, and I'm competing against other people, and you just look at that resume. Well, if part of that resume is mentioned in, featured on, here's a copy of my book or whatever, and it's all thought leadership around that industry, now you've separated yourself from the competitor, the other applicants, and that brand that's looking to hire you. Now maybe you get that second and third interview, and still you can blow it and not get hired. But I think that some of that thought leadership can play into that so well. I think that's just spectacular. From the perspective of let's say a target audience looking at an entrepreneur or a thought leader, isn't it true, or isn't it a big factor as well, that now you've kind of broken through that psychological barrier where they don't feel like it's a salesperson as much as the person that handed them the flyer or the web link? If they're being given that piece of thought leadership, like, hey, you know what, I just wrote this article it addresses that question you were asking me before we meet next week. Here's a couple links, read this article, listen to that interview that I did. Doesn't that set the stage for at least giving you the best shot as possible of landing that deal when you're using, because that thought leadership piece is wonderful as a digital footprint, but then that person should be using that in their business development strategically as well to open up doors to close deals, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it also depends on the content. So like right now, we there's some salespeople that are like, oh, cool, I'm doing that, and they're starting to do that, and I'm like, baby steps, I'm proud of you, because a lot of salespeople don't do it, use content. So, but they only have one piece of content, and it's not even addressing the challenge that person actually had. And so you've got to have the right ammo to use. So it's an amazing tool. It increases conversions. I mean, I can give you stats up the wazoo of, just trust me on it. If there's content that's educating as a part of the sales process, people spend more with you. They close faster. They're better clients. It's unbelievable. There's so much just more trust. But I would say that it's got to be the right thing. So, for example, we did a series around content because CFOs are dream killers for us. CMOs are like, yes, we believe we should be doing this. But they're like, I got this CFO here that's just like, nope, doesn't want it to happen.
Because he's got to write the check.
Yeah, he's got to write the check. And so we're like, okay, well, let's get a series around content around there. Now, if I would have given him an article about content marketing and why he needs to be doing this and this and this, that wouldn't have helped him. He would have sent that to the CFO, and the CFO would have been like, I don't care. We don't have the budget. But then if I sent him an article that was challenges that CMOs have with their CFOs with content marketing, and then basically explained it in very good terms that the CFO would respond well to, then they use that asset, they can use it, and it's going to accomplish the goal. So I think my advice on that is that it's just important to have the right types of assets and ammo. So, for example, sometimes it might make sense to have, like, instead of a byline, it might be where you're talked about in an article. Now, granted, bylines can really gain trust, and they're great to do that. But it might be like somebody has issues. Is like, I don't get this company. I've never heard of them. And then they get an article like we did. There was a couple features of, not necessarily some are features, but others were us being mentioned in industry news where we sent that. Now, that was specific because they had an issue with, I've never heard of this company. So that's different than educating. That's credibility. And so we sent them the credibility asset instead of the educational one.
It's in a simple sense, you could sit down and think, what are the top 5 frequently asked questions that I typically get from prospects? And then what are 5 more that if they knew to ask these questions, boy, they would really get my product, service, whatever it is. So here's 10 questions. And then you just start creating content around that so that as your sales staff, yourself as an entrepreneur are interacting with your target audience, you're able to just take this piece in this conversation. Never send them all because they're not going to read them all. But yeah, to your point, that's really huge. You got to know where that next step is in the buyer's cycle and then have that piece of content ready. And the beautiful part is, while you do need to continue doing content all the time, those pieces of content can be evergreen. So you can be talking about something 9 steps down the road, but then going back to this piece and using it today, because it doesn't matter if you wrote a piece, 9 months ago, it still is relevant for that conversation. Yeah, that's really huge. We've touched on things that I never thought we would, and I think that's spectacular. So let's just wrap up with what's the best way that people can reach out and pick up a copy of your book or reach out and engage with your company?
So, I mean, you can check out the easiest way is just to buy the book on Amazon. It's actually, I think, cheaper than I can get it for you. But type in Amazon top of mind, and johnhallspeaking.com is my speaking site. And then Influence & Co., influenceandco.com is the company site. And then on Twitter, I'm pretty active at John Hall. And then LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm on all of it. But Facebook's more for personal. But I would say all the other ones are ones that I'm pretty easily reachable by.
Perfect. Well, John, thanks for taking time. Learned a lot and loved some of our brainstorming ideas. Thanks for taking the time and chatting with us today.
All right. It was good seeing you again, buddy.
You too, man.
You've been listening to the Art of Authority podcast. Are you interested in building your authority positioning as the #1 strategy to grow your business, brand, and influence? Book your authority audit today. This 7-point audit of your current authority position will uncover opportunities and show you how to be seen as a leading expert and authority your industry looks to for advice. Visit www.authoritypositioningcoach.com.